Career. Upon joining the Army, Barry was commissioned as a hospital assistant in the British Army on 6th of July, 1813, taking up posts in Chelsea and then the Royal Military Hospital in Plymouth, achieving a promotion to assistant surgeon to the forces, equivalent to lieutenant, on 7th of December, 1815. Following this military training, Barry was posted to Cape Town, South Africa, in 1816. Through Lord Buchan, Barry had a letter of introduction to the governor, Lieutenant General Lord Charles Somerset. Following the successful, even spectacular treatment of Lord Charles's sick daughter, Barry was welcomed into the family, maintained a close friendship with the governor, and became his personal physician. In 1822, Somerset appointed Barry as Colonial Medical Inspector, an extraordinary jump in expectations from Barry's low military rank, which brought with it great responsibility. Over 10 years of work in the Cape, Barry effected significant changes, among them improvements to sanitation and water systems, improved conditions for enslaved people, prisoners, and the mentally ill, and provision of a sanctuary for the leper population. Barry also performed one of the first known successful cesarean sections in which both mother and child survived. The child was christened James Barry Munnick in Barry's honor, and the name was passed down through the family, leading to Barry's name being borne by a later Prime Minister of South Africa, J.B.M. Hertzog. Barry also gained enemies by criticizing local officials and their handling of medical matters, but the advantage of a close relationship with the governor meant that the repercussions of these outspoken views were usually smoothed over. Barry was promoted to surgeon to the forces on 22 November 1827. Barry's subsequent posting was to Mauritius in 1828. In 1829, Barry risked a great deal of trouble by going absent without leave to return to England and treat Lord Charles Somerset, who had fallen ill, and remained there until Lord Charles's death in 1831. Barry's subsequent posting was to Jamaica and then the island of St. Helena in 1836. At St. Helena, one clash with a fellow army surgeon resulted in Barry being arrested and court-martialed on a charge of conduct unbecoming of the character of an officer and a gentleman. Barry was found not guilty and honorably acquitted. Wherever Barry served across the British Empire, improvements were made to sanitary conditions and the conditions and diet of both the common soldier and other underrepresented groups. Barry was outraged by unnecessary suffering and took a heavy-handed and sometimes tactless approach to demanding improvements for the poor and underprivileged, which often incited anger from officials and military officers. On several occasions, Barry was both arrested and demoted for the extremity of this behavior. Barry held strict and unusually modern views about nutrition, being completely vegetarian and teetotal, and, while keeping most personal relationships distant, was very fond of pets, particularly a beloved poodle named Psyche. The name of the black servant Barry first employed in South Africa and who remained with Barry until the doctor's death is not precisely known, though Charles Dickens, in a fictionalized account of Barry's life, calls him Black John. Playwright Jean Binney's radio play Dr. Barry, BBC 1982, identified him as John Joseph Danson. In 1840, Barry was posted to the Leeward Islands and Windward Islands of the West Indies, there focusing on medicine, management, and improving the conditions of the troops, and receiving a promotion to principal medical officer. In 1845, Barry contracted yellow fever and left for England for sick leave in October. After being cleared for duty, Barry was posted to Malta in 1846. Here, Barry was severely reprimanded for inexplicably taking a seat in the local church that was reserved for the clergy, and had to deal with the threat and eventual actuality of a cholera epidemic, which broke out in 1850. The following posting was to Corfu in 1851, which brought with it a promotion to the rank of Deputy Inspector General of Hospitals on 16th of May, equivalent to Lieutenant Colonel. In 1857, Barry was posted to Canada and granted the local rank of Inspector General of Hospitals, equivalent to Brigadier General, on 25 September. In that position, Barry fought for better food, sanitation, and proper medical care for prisoners and lepers, as well as soldiers and their families. This local rank was confirmed as substantive on 7 December 1858. Barry left with John, a servant, and Barry's dog, Psyche, c. 1862, Jamaica, death. Despite protesting against the decision, Barry was forcefully retired by the Army on 19th July 1859 because of ill health and old age, and was succeeded as Inspector General of Hospitals by David Dumbreck. After a quiet retirement in London, Barry finally died from dysentery on 25 July 1865. The identity of the woman who discovered the truth of Barry's physical sex is disputed, but she was probably a charwoman who also laid out the dead. The charwoman, after failing to elicit payment for her services, sought redress in another way. She visited Barry's physician, Major D.R. McKinnon, who had issued the death certificate upon which Barry was identified as male. The woman claimed that Barry's body had been biologically female and had marks suggesting Barry had at one point borne a child. However, no professional examination was carried out which could have confirmed these points beyond doubt. When McKinnon refused to pay her, she took the story to the press, and the situation became public. It was discussed in an exchange of letters between George Graham of the General Register Office and McKinnon. Sir, it has been stated to me that Inspector General Dr. James Barry, who died at 14 Margaret Saint on 25 July 1865, was after his death found to be a female. As you furnished the certificate as to the cause of his death, I take the liberty of asking you whether what I have heard is true, and whether you yourself ascertained that he was a woman and apparently had been a mother? Perhaps you may decline answering these questions, but I ask them not for publication, but for my own information. I have the honor to be, Sir, your faithful servant, George Graham. Registrar General McKinnon's response was as follows. Sir, I beg to acknowledge the receipt of your letter of the 23rd August respecting the death of Inspector General Dr. James Barry. I had been intimately acquainted with that gentleman for a good many years, both in the West Indies and in England, and I never had any suspicion that Dr. Barry was a female. I attended him during his last illness and for some months previously for bronchitis. The affection causing his death was diarrhea produced apparently by errors in diet. On one occasion, after Dr. Barry's death, I was sent for to the office of Sir Charles MacGregor, and there the woman who performed the last offices for Dr. Barry was waiting to speak to me. She wished to obtain some perquisites of her employment, which the lady who kept the lodging house in which Dr. Barry died had refused to give her. Amongst other things, she said Dr. Barry was a female, that I was a pretty doctor not to know this, that she would not like to be attended by me. I informed her that it was none of my business whether Dr. Barry was a male or a female, that I thought it as likely he might be neither Vizzy, an imperfectly developed man. She then said that she had examined the body, that it was a perfect female, farther that there were marks of her having had a child when very young. I then inquired, how have you formed this conclusion? The woman, pointing to the lower part of her stomach, said, from marks here, I am a married woman, am the mother of 9 children, I ought to know. The woman seemed to me to think that she had become acquainted with a great secret and wished to be paid for keeping it. I informed her that all Dr. Barry's relatives were dead, damp, that it was no secret of mine, damp, that my own impression was that Dr. Barry was a hermaphrodite. But whether Dr. Barry was male, female, or hermaphrodite, I do not know, nor had I any purpose in making the discovery, as I could positively swear to the identity of the body as being that of a person whom I had been acquainted with as Inspector General of Hospitals for a period of 8 or 9 years. I have the honor to be, Sir, yours faithfully signed, D.R. McKinnon. After the matter was made public, some people claimed to have known of it all along, although many who had known Barry expressed surprise or even disbelief. The British Army, seeking to suppress the story, sealed Barry's service records for the next 100 years. The historian Isabel Ray gained access to the Army records in the 1950s and concluded that the painter James Barry was indeed Barry's uncle. Barry was buried in Kensal Green Cemetery with a Portland stone headstone inscribed Dr. James Barry, Inspector General of Hospitals. It was claimed by several sources that John, the manservant who always attended Barry, returned to Jamaica, but his actual fate is unknown.